I don't know how you're doing with your reading this year so far, but turns out I've been a bit of a busy bookworm the last couple of months, and I have... Hi. Thank you. And so I have a lot of books to share with you, 14 in fact today. So grab a drink, maybe grab a snack, get cozy, because this one is going to be a long one. Right, Tucker? Tucker's ready. Hey everyone, it's Anna and Tucker, and we hope you're having a great day today. So today's video is all about the reading that I've been doing the last couple of months. Half and half are audiobooks and physical books, I think. So it's pretty split down the middle. I was a little heavier on the audiobooks a couple months ago and a little heavier on the physical books more recently. It turns out I have quite a few 4 and 5 paw reads that I did over the last couple of months. And so I think that a lot of those came towards the end of the month this month, and I just got through them like super quick because they were so good. So I'm really excited to share these with you today. Let's get started. The first book I have is The Serendipity by Emma St. Clair. I gave this one 3 paws. I was really excited for this one when I saw it was being released, but it didn't quite measure up for me. This is a closed door kind of whimsical, magical romance novel. Basically, a billionaire is running away from New York City from all his troubles, and he goes to this small town just outside of New York and buys an apartment building. The apartment building he buys happens to be magical, and he kind of is in over his head managing this building, and he meets one of the tenants who he's attracted to, but she keeps showing up in the wrong place, and they don't like each other very much at first. But the building, being magical, has decided that these two are actually perfect for each other, and so it keeps trying to get them together, you know, getting them in awkward situations and hoping that they'll work it out. The reason why I only gave it 3 paws is because it was so slow. Like, it was so slow. I think, you know, slow burn romances are great if they're written well, but I think not a lot happened in this book. There was, you know, good character development and the writing was good. It just took forever for anything to happen. And so, like, the first 2/3 of the book, I didn't feel like a whole lot happened, and the majority of the plot kind of like took place at the end of the book. The other big problem I had with the book is that for a magical building, honestly, it wasn't all that magical. And I know that the magic is supposed to be subtle. I understand this. It's also supposed to be a bit mystical in how it works, and it's not constant, it's not consistent. It's just kind of as the tenants of the building need. I mean, like, really subtle, overly subtle, I think. And so it didn't really, I just think it didn't really live up to its synopsis. It wasn't a bad book. I did finish it, so I didn't DNF it, but I was really let down. So I'm not sure that I would recommend this one as far as being a closed door romance. If you love those types, this book would probably be really good for you. Just don't expect all that much magic and expect a super slow burn. The next book I have is actually a novella. It is Killjoy by Holly Jackson. This is the novella that goes along with A Good Girl's Guide to Murder trilogy. And I also gave this one 3 paws. It was okay. I mean, yeah, it was just okay. It's a prequel, so it is meant to happen prior to the beginning of A Good Girl's Guide to Murder. It's a murder mystery, dinner theater kind of book. All the teenagers, the main characters in the main series, at a teen's house. They're all invited to this murder mystery kind of event, and they all have to dress up in 20s attire, and they all have a role to play, and they, have to take clues throughout the house and solve the murder. And yeah, it was just okay. There wasn't a whole lot of character development. You're expected to kind of know who the characters are already in advance. And I did, so that was fine. The mystery was mid. It was only okay. I think it was just a fun little read in the sense of it was like a nice way to wrap up the trilogy because I had just finished it. But really, otherwise, I wouldn't really recommend reading it or picking it up if you haven't read the trilogy. But if you like the characters and you want one more story that involves most of the characters, I think it's perfectly fine to read. It's just not as good as the original trilogy. All right, moving on to 3.5 Paws. And the book I have in this category, there's just one, was a book that started out really good, actually. I read it pretty quickly because I was so into it. But it faltered at the end. And the book I'm talking about is another crime thriller. It is Ward D by Freida McFadden. And this is my first time reading Freida McFadden. I've heard a lot of good things about her books, and so I was really excited to pick this one up. This one was recently published, so this isn't exactly from her backlog. Ward D follows a medical student named Amy who is, she's not interning, but she's doing her 3rd year of medical school, and she's doing her rotations at a hospital. And so she unexpectedly gets told that she's got to do a night shift on Ward D at the hospital. Ward D is the psych unit in the hospital, and this terrifies her. She's very scared. She looks for ways to get out of it. She does not want to do it. And everybody's kind of telling her, it'll be fine. Just because it's a psych ward and it's a nighttime shift, it's not going to be a big deal. The doctor that's on call tonight is a great doctor. You're going to learn so much. It's going to be a great time. And so she kind of stuffs down all her fears and she goes in for her night on Ward D. And this is a place that's on total lockdown. So you enter through a secure door, and then once you're in there, you're in there. There's bars on the buildings. You have to enter a special code to get out, and there is no emergency exit. You're trapped. And as the night progresses, weird things start to happen. She meets the doctor and she meets the nurse that are there for the night. They seem fine, a little bit quirky, but there are there's 4 people on staff. And as the night progresses, she starts to meet some of the patients that are there, and they're all very wacky in their own way. But she starts to get this feeling like she's not going to survive the night, and she doesn't know what to do. She's like panicking on the inside. So that's the setup for the story, and I'm not going to go too much further into it because then I would be giving you spoilers, and I don't want to do that. This book started out as a 5-star read for me. It's very quick paced, it's short chapters, it alternates between things that happened in the past and things that are happening right then, and they all, kind of converge eventually. And so you start to see, a little bit of Amy's past, you start to understand why she's nervous, why she's scared, and then, you find out what's kind of going on in the current timeline. It's all very good. The reason why it didn't remain 5 stars for me is because I started to see the twist that was coming. And, you can never really be sure until you actually read it and you're sure. But I started being able to guess what was going to happen next and what the big twist was. There was a little tiny twist in the mystery that I didn't foresee coming, but the rest of it I was kind of very good at guessing. And so even though the writing remained constant, I liked the characters, I liked the overall story, it knocked it down quite a bit when I realized that I was right at guessing a lot of things. So I think it's still worth a read, especially if you like crime thrillers, and especially if you like this author, Freida McFadden. It definitely hasn't turned me off to her books or anything like that, but this one just kind of faltered at the end. Next up, I have 3 audiobooks to share with you, all of which I rated as 4 paws, which is pretty good. The first one I want to talk about is the first prequel in the Hunger Games trilogy, which is The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. So I read the Hunger Games trilogy a long time ago. I re-listened to the audiobooks last year sometime, and then with anticipation for the next prequel to come out back in March, I decided I should probably listen to or read The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. And so I realized how long the book was, and I decided audio was a better way to go. In this book, like I said, it's a Hunger Games prequel. It follows President Snow before he became President Snow. In this book, he is, I think, about 20 years old. He is trying to get into university. He has been chosen to be a mentor in the 10th Hunger Games, and he's been assigned District 12, and he meets his tribute, Lucy Gray, and you know, it's all about them and their relationship, and you get to see kind of how the beginnings of the Hunger Games started out. You know, they were completely different from the games by the time you get to the Hunger Games trilogy with Katniss and Peeta and that whole bunch. So the biggest difference between this book and all the other Hunger Games books is that this book is written in third person. All the other books in the series are written in first person. This book is written in third person, but it's limited third person. It is strictly from Snow's perspective. And so it is a bit like first person in the sense that if Snow doesn't see it or experience it, we don't know about it. The overall story, it's pretty good, actually. I thought it was really insightful to see kind of where it all begins and see that Snow does kind of start out a little bit more human than he ends up being in the later trilogy. This book humanizes him a little bit, and you get a lot of backstory that was left out of the trilogy, and so that's all well and good. The thing that really kind of bothered me from the audiobook aspect were 2 things. One, the third person. Just in general, the narration itself was really good, but it was hard to switch gears, I think, from the way I was used to listening to the trilogy being told to me. The other issue that really took it down a notch for me with the audiobook specifically was that this book is called The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. So Lucy Gray is a songbird, and in the book she sings quite a bit, right? We're told the backstory of the covey and how their names came to be, and their names are all associated with ballads and songs. And so there are a lot of songs that are in there, and we get a lot of lyrics and everything like that. And so the narrator doesn't sing them. He just reads them, much like a poem would be read, but it kind of messes with the flow, I think, of this story. It would have been better if they had found a narrator who could sing just a little, so that the narrator could have sung the verses instead of just reciting them as if they were poetry. The reciting is good, like I said, and the rest of the narration is very good, but every time it was supposed to be something that was sung, and it was just spoken, it kind of took me out of that world for a little while, and then it was hard to like kind of get back in. And so those were my major issues. Overall, I think the story is the weakest story out of the 5 of them, and its main strong suit is simply providing all of the backstory that it provides for the Hunger Games later on. So if you love the Hunger Games trilogy, I definitely recommend that you familiarize yourself with this book. But if you have the choice between audio and physical book, I would actually choose the physical book for this one. I don't think I would recommend the audiobook for that particular one. The next audiobook I want to talk about is I'm Crying Because I'm Laughing by Youngmi Mayer. This is a memoir about a Korean American comedian and basically just her life up until this point. I started listening to this book on recommendation from Spill the Reads. I've gotten a lot of good recommendations from her recently, so if you haven't checked out her channel, you should, because she reads some great books. This particular one really piqued my interest because it is a memoir by a Korean American, and I am a Korean American. So I thought it was a good fit. I decided to listen to the audiobook instead of reading the book because the author also narrates the book. And I'm glad that I listened to the book. There are little snippets of Korean sprinkled out throughout the book, and she says the Korean and then the translation, and she does it all very nicely. And so I think if you're not at all familiar with Korean, but this book interests you, you should think about the audiobook strictly for that, if nothing else. But like I said, this is a memoir, and so she starts off very early in life. She starts describing her family actually before she's even born, and a lot of her anecdotes are very interesting to listen to. It's very serious and poignant in some aspects, and then in others it's actually quite funny. And so it's a really good mixture. But she was born in Korea to a mom who is Korean and a dad who is American, and she spent the majority of her early years in Korea or in another Southeast Asian country, and she only moved to the United States in her late teens or early 20s, I think. For me, this book was really polarizing. There were times when I listened and I was laughing and I was really in agreement with a lot of things that she said about what it's like to be Korean American and, you know, certain experiences, you know, especially experiences that she had growing up with a Korean mother. I can identify with a lot of that. But there were other pieces that I really strongly disagreed with. And I felt like her experience as a Korean American, she makes it sound like she is kind of speaking for all of us. And I disagree with that quite a bit, actually. I think your experience coming to America later in life is going to be very different than if you are Korean American, born and raised in America. Part of it depends heavily on where you grew up, for sure, but in her book, she kind of makes it sound like I'm speaking for everybody, and what I am saying is definitely true for every single Korean American person out there. And there were times I really, really disagreed with what she was saying because it wasn't my experience. It was completely different. And I got really emotional at times. This book had me feeling all kinds of different emotions depending on what the chapter was about. It was actually really, really interesting how I could, like, you know, 1 minute be like laughing and thinking everything is really funny, and then 5 minutes later I'm like hard disagreeing with what she's saying. It was like a pendulum swinging back and forth for me the whole time. So the beginning of the book was really funny and great for me. The middle of the book was where it was most polarizing, and then back towards the end, when she's talking about her life, kind of after she got married and had a kid, much less polarizing for me. So overall, if you are at all interested in learning about Korean culture and one person's experience, I highly recommend going out and listening to this book. It is worth a listen for sure. It is quite entertaining. Another audiobook that I listened to in the last couple of months that I also rated 4 paws is the first book in a series called Ink and Bone by Rachel Caine. Ink and Bone is, I think, more of a fantasy novel than anything else. In this world, the Great Library of Alexandria did not burn down. It actually survived, and so in modern day it has become the center of all knowledge and learning. Not only that, the Great Library has now become the center of government for the entire world. And so there are little kind of satellite libraries throughout the world who work with the main library. And there are librarians that are all over the world, and they are actually both librarians and also government officials. The other twist in this world is that the library has decided that knowledge is too powerful for everyone to have access to. And so nobody is allowed to own an original book. All original books are stored in the library. They're all handwritten. The printing press was never allowed to be invented in this world. So copies of books don't exist. People are definitely allowed to learn to read and write, and people are encouraged to write their own journals, and so they are allowed to own those things, but they are not allowed to own any other type of physical books. And so, because of that, we follow a boy whose family deals in black market books. So books have now become a black market trade, and his family has a way of getting their hands on these original works. And so this teenager is a book runner, basically. It's very dangerous for him to go and deliver a book to someone who's paid a large amount of money to have this book. And so there are people in this world called book burners who take Greek fire, which is very much a thing in this world, and they kind of protest the library by burning books or burning themselves in the streets. It's a little nuts. The teen boy is very smart. His father wants him to become part of the library. He wants an inside man. And so the boy goes and he takes a test, and he is invited to go study at the Library of Alexandria in Egypt. And so he goes there and he studies with a bunch of other people who he doesn't get along with at first. And he's got a really crotchety, very strict professor who he doesn't like at all. Nobody likes this guy. And so it's this constant battle, right? The library is the villain here in this book, and the kids, the new librarians, they all become librarians, are kind of finding out that the library is not what they claim to be, and they, towards the end, decide that they've got to do something about it. I really enjoyed this book. It was a little difficult to get into. There's a lot of world building and building up in the beginning that you kind of have to get through, and the vocabulary in this book is a bit more complex than I'm probably used to, and so it takes a little bit to get into it. But once the story gets started, it's quite good, and it's certainly a very interesting take on what our world could be if just one thing had changed in history, and this great wonder of the world had not been destroyed, and instead all of that knowledge had been saved. What would our world look like? So like I said, this is the first book in this series, and I'm looking forward to listening to the second one and seeing where that one goes. So if you're looking for a good fantasy listen and that kind of world interests you, I definitely recommend picking that one up, especially in audiobook form. The narrator's very good. He's British, and the story's good, the narration is good, and so I highly recommend it. I have one middle grade novel that I read over the last couple of months, and it was actually an advanced reader copy that I was able to receive. It is a fantasy novel called The Curiosities by W.H. Eatons. And in this book, there is a brother and sister pair who start to notice some very strange things happening in their neighborhood. The sister is the older one, and the brother is the younger one. And the brother, I believe he is neurodivergent in some way. And so he starts to notice that the little creatures in the neighborhood are missing all of a sudden. And he starts to notice some other things. His sister runs a kind of nature vlog or something like that, and so she's got this set up in her room outside of her window of plants and various things that attract bees. And then she videotapes them, and she's kind of, very well known by teachers and her friends for doing this. Then she starts to notice that the insects, the bees, are having some very strange behaviors that she can't figure out. They've got a teacher who's very invested in them, who lives in a pirate ship out in the middle of the woods, quite eccentric herself. There is also a pack of neighborhood cats in their neighborhood who are also telling us a bit of the story. And we follow one particular cat who is not very cat-like, in the sense that this cat is not curious at all. This cat has heard the phrase, "Curiosity killed the cat," and he very much believes in this phrase. And so he has made it his life's mission to not be a curious cat. He lives a very, very boring life. He tells himself, no, I'm not going to be curious about that because I want to remain safe and alive. And so his other cat friends, he's got a cat friend who never leaves the roof. This cat has agoraphobia, and this cat that can't leave his roof starts to notice that the birds aren't coming by anymore. There are animals and insects that are no longer in the neighborhood. And so at roughly the same time, the cats in the neighborhood and the children in the neighborhood realize something real fishy is going on. And then there's this mysterious substance that starts floating around town. And when it touches a human or an animal, except for cats, it makes them turn into zombies or zombie-like creatures. And there is a potential alien invasion potentially happening. And so the story goes back and forth between the kids and the cats. And eventually they converge together and work together to try to figure out what is going on and how to save the town from this strange substance and how to stop it from turning people into zombies. And so I gave this one 4 paws. It was really entertaining. It's a very easy read. I think that kids especially would really enjoy it. There's a lot of adventure, there's a lot of action, there's really good character building, and I think the dual perspective of the children and the cats work very well together. Everybody is kind of quirky in their own way, and there's a bit of a mystery, and as an adult, it's fairly easy to guess eventually what's going on, but it certainly doesn't detract from the story. It is meant to be an easier story to understand because it is meant for children. I think it would make an especially great read aloud for a classroom, 3rd, 4th, 5th grade, something like that. I think it would be really, really great. It's not too big of a book. I think it's less than 300 pages, and it's really entertaining. So I highly recommend this one for kids or adults looking for a good middle grade read. So like I said, this was an advanced copy, and this book will be published on May 7th. All right, we're getting into the really good books here. We're now at a book that I rated 4.5 paws. It is another advanced copy of a book I received. It's a crime thriller called The First Hunt by Audrey J. Cole. So when I started reading this book, I had no idea that this book is actually a prequel to an existing duology from this author. So I literally walked into reading this book completely blind, and I have to say, I was blown away. I read this book very quickly because I was so into it. It was really, really good. So now that I know it's a prequel, it is an origin story for a man who, in the duology, is a serial killer. This book takes us back to how that guy became a serial killer. The book starts out with a man picking up a woman and giving her a ride in the late 70s or early 80s. He has his 10-year-old son in the back seat, and he stops and he gets out of the car with this woman, and he tells his son to stay put. And he walks off into the woods with this woman. And of course, 10-year-old boy, being a 10-year-old boy, does not stay put. He gets out of the car and he heads towards the woods, and he hears something. And then eventually he hears some screaming. And in the end, he ends up witnessing a very gruesome murder. And he runs back to the car before his dad can get back, in the hopes that his dad does not know that he has witnessed his dad murdering this woman. And he's, at first he's scared. He's not sure what would possess his dad to do something, but his mom had died a few years previous, and so his dad is the only person he's got left in this world, and he is not about to lose his dad. He is disturbed a bit by his dad's actions, but he's also kind of, explaining it away in his head to not make it okay necessarily, but just make it not quite so bothersome. And he doesn't want his dad to get caught or go to jail, so he is not about to turn his dad in. A few years later, we start to get the story from a perspective of a woman who is an investigative journalist. And, she does a crime beat for the greater Seattle area. This story takes place around the time of the Green River Killer, which is a real-life famous serial killer. But at the time, the police didn't know who it was. They just had a string of murders. Most of them had similar MOs, but they weren't exactly sure if it was one person or not. So the investigative journalist that we follow, her sister was murdered 2 years previously, and they never found out who did it. She is fairly obsessed with figuring out who her sister's killer is, and she thinks that it must have been the Green River Killer. Except the timeline doesn't work. Her sister would have had to be the first victim of the Green River Killer, and it happened 2 years before they figure he started killing. And so it doesn't really fit. And so the police have kind of blown her off, and she's kind of got her own murder board up in her apartment that she kind of hides from people. Much of the story goes back and forth between the boy and the woman, and we have a few time jumps, and so we get bits and pieces of the little boy's life, and the little boy knows that his dad is doing some stuff, but he's too afraid to ask. And then the woman eventually, she quits her investigative journalist job, and she becomes a famous true crime novelist. That's really all I can say. If I say too much more, it will give this story away, and so I'm gonna stop right there. So like I said, this book was very, very entertaining. It was very good. The writing was really good. The chapters were fairly short, and so it helped keep the quick pace. I thought the story and the mystery was very, very good. Some twists and turns, I had hunches about, but there were a few at the end that I did not see coming. I don't know if that's because I didn't read the other two books, and so it might be more obvious to someone who's read the duology. I'm not sure. Maybe, maybe not. But for me, as someone, walking in brand new to this whole thing, there was a whole lot in this book I didn't see coming at all, which is great because that's what we're looking for in crime thrillers, right? We don't want to be able to guess everything. The only reason this is not a 5-paw read for me is because something happened at the end that like really bummed me out. I've only ever read one other book where something like this happens, and that also bummed me out. If I tell you what it is, it would ruin the whole book, so I'm not going to say. But something happened, I thought it was like a fake out, it was not a fake out, and then I was kind of bummed. But that actually spurred me to do some research, and then that's when I figured out that The First Hunt is a prequel. I highly recommend this book. It's being published June 17th, and I would highly recommend that you put this one on your list if you're looking for a new crime thriller. It is really, really good. I am planning on picking up the duology and reading the other 2 books, the original 2 books in the series, adding it into my list somewhere, my very, very long TBR list. I have no idea when I'm going to read these books, but I loved this arc so much, I'm going to go out and buy the other 2 books to read. I have another book that I rated at 4.5 paws, and it is another crime thriller. It is Good Girl, Bad Blood by Holly Jackson. This is book number 2 in the A Good Girl's Guide to Murder trilogy. So in this book, Pip has kind of sworn off any more investigations. It kind of burned her too much in the first book, and she's just kind of trying to get through the rest of the year. Her good friend comes to her and says, "My brother is missing. The police won't listen to me. I'm really worried. Please help me out." And at first she says, no, I don't do that anymore. Find someone else. And he's like, "But I can't, there's nobody else." And she says, "Okay, I'll go talk to the police for you, but I won't make any promises." And so she goes and talks to the police, and they don't agree that the older brother is missing. They just think that he left of his own volition for a little while. And so they don't agree to take a missing persons case. But Pip's spidey senses are kind of going off, and she's like, I do think that there is something off here. Okay, fine, I will investigate. And so then we get a season 2 of the Good Girl's Guide to Murder podcast, and she spends the rest of the book investigating this guy's disappearance. This book was probably my least favorite out of the 3 main trilogy books. Doesn't mean it was a bad book. It was actually a really good book. It was just my least favorite, but everything that I loved about the first book was present in the second one. You know, short-ish chapters, a mix of different presentation types. So, you know, sometimes we get a narrative, sometimes we get transcripts of various interviews that Pip's doing, sometimes we get, you know, what's supposed to be like a Word document or something like that of her notes or her thoughts. Sometimes we get an email, and so it helps to kind of propel the story forward. I thought the mystery was very good. There's a few mysteries in here. There's more than one that come into play. There's some tie-ins back to the original mystery, and so it was all very good. I did a deep dive into the trilogy itself, so if you're interested in more of a deep dive into the plot of all 3 books, plus the novella, and then more of my thoughts on the entire trilogy, you can go ahead and check out that video if you would like, but I'm just going to kind of keep it to a minimum here because I did talk about it in a different video. So I'm curious, you know how in the beginning I suggested you go get a drink and a snack? What are you eating and drinking right now? I really want to know. I am very hungry at the moment, but I don't have a snack because I'm not going to torture you guys with listening to my munching on things. That's terrible. I do have some water though. A super, super exciting drink for me. But I'm wondering what you guys are having right now. Let me know. And now we've made it to all of my 5-paw reads, and I have several, which is fantastic because the beginning part of the year was looking only okay for me. So the first one I have is actually an audiobook. It is the second prequel in the Hunger Games series, Sunrise on the Reaping, that was just released in March. And I think this one might be my favorite book out of all of them. It was that good. In this book, we're following Haymitch, who is 16, and this is the year that he gets reaped for the 50th Hunger Games. And so the 50th Hunger Games is a second quarter quell, and in quarter quells, Panem goes a little nuts. They always add a little something extra to make it extra terrible every 25 years. And so that particular year, instead of one boy and one girl from each district being reaped, they choose 2 boys and 2 girls for a total of 4 tributes from each district. And so we see a lot of Haymitch's personality in this book. We get an early preview of Effie at some point and some other characters, early versions of them. And much of the book actually is spent prior to the actual Hunger Games. And so we see Haymitch, and at first he is kind of wanting to be a lone wolf. There are 2 of his district mates that he doesn't really get along with at first, and then some things happen and it kind of makes them bond, and we really get to know all these characters really, really well. We also see the beginnings of the resistance in this case. And so at the beginning of the book, Haymitch is clueless about all of this stuff. He is a teenager, head over heels in love with another Covey girl, Lenore Dove. And she is a feisty one for sure, but they are in love. They are separated. He worries about her constantly, and so even though she's not present in most of the book, actually, she's present in Haymitch's mind a lot. We find out about Haymitch's family life and all of these sort of mysteries about Haymitch's early life that he doesn't ever talk about. And it's great because Haymitch is like a completely different person, of course, before he is scarred by the 50th Hunger Games. And so if I say too much more, I think I'm going to ruin the book, so I don't want to do that. But the audiobook was amazing. The narration was fantastic. They found the perfect voice to narrate for Haymitch. This book is told in the first person, much like Katniss was the narrator for us in the first 3 books. Haymitch is the narrator in his own book, and we get more backstory, we find out some more things, and then we start the process of having our hearts ripped out over and over and over again, because instead of 24 tributes, there are 48 tributes, and we get to know quite a few of them very well because many of them across districts kind of team up and formulate a coalition of sorts. And so not only do we get a lot of character development for all of the tributes from District 12, we get a lot of character development from some other districts as well. And then we have our hearts ripped out over and over again. So if books tend to make you emotional, you tend to get attached to characters, and then, and then you feel some things and you cry and you let some tears shed, I highly recommend you keep a tissue box real close and handy to you when you're reading this book or listening to this book. Either one I would recommend, but honestly, the narration is fantastic. So all of the issues that I had with the first prequel was not present here. It was an amazing, amazing listen to. So if you love the Hunger Games trilogy and you haven't picked up the 5th book yet, I highly recommend it. It is fantastic. It wraps up in kind of a way that makes you think that there aren't going to be any more Hunger Games books, but I'm like kind of hoping that somehow there's some way that like there's going to be another prequel book. Like, I love those books so much, so I'm hopeful, but you never know. All right, my next 5-paw read is the last book in the Good Girl's Guide to Murder trilogy, which is As Good as Dead by Holly Jackson. A very short recap on what happens in As Good as Dead. Pip has figured out the last set of mysteries, and the way the last book ended, she's like pretty torn up. She's got some serious PTSD and psychological issues going on. And then she starts to notice little signs that indicate she might be being stalked by someone. And it is disturbing her. She goes to the police. They don't really believe her. You know, they care about her at this point because they've had so much contact with her. How can you not? But they really don't believe that she's being stalked, so they're not really offering any help. Her boyfriend, Ravi, is trying to be very protective of her because he does believe that something kooky is going on and potentially dangerous. And as the book progresses, things that she thinks might be happening, but also might not be happening, and she might be losing her mind instead. Some of those things pan out, and they cause her life to really, really spiral. And there's, you know, there's several more mysteries. Again, I did a deep dive for this whole series in a completely different video, so if you want to know more about that, I will put the card for that video up here, and you are more than welcome to check it out. But as far as what I think about this book was probably my favorite out of the 3 in the trilogy. I devoured this book, honestly. And it's a big book, you know, it's like 450 pages. The print is pretty big, which is nice, but it's still a chunky book. But the pacing is like very fast, and a lot of things happen in this book. And just when you think like literally it can't get any crazier, it gets more crazy and some more things happen. And so it just kept me on the edge of my seat the whole time. I didn't really at first see how it could tie in as a trilogy to the rest of what happened in book 1 and 2, but that became apparent maybe a third to halfway through the book, and then it all started kind of making sense. So if you're reading this series and you're kind of having that feeling, don't worry, it all gets wrapped up very nicely and tied together with this big beautiful bow, and it all very much tracks together. So if you're looking for a crime thriller series that you want to get into, I would definitely recommend this one. It is billed as a YA series, but honestly, it doesn't really read like a YA series. There's some profanity, there's some not like super graphic violence, but there's violence. So yeah, it reads like older YA, new adult maybe, but I certainly didn't feel like I was reading like a childish book or anything like that. It is not like that at all. So I highly recommend it. It was one of my favorite reads that I've had so far this year. The next book that I want to talk about is The Dead Guy Next Door by Lucy Score. This is part of a series. It's part of the Riley Thorne series, I guess. And this is the first book. When I picked it up, I had no idea it was part of a series, but I'm kind of glad it is, because I'm definitely going to pick up the second one. This one I also rated 5 paws. It was really good. Also very big. But the chapters are really short, and it was a really, really quick read. So this book is a romance, crime, thriller, supernatural novel. It's like a lot of things. We follow Riley Thorne, who is kind of a down on her luck 30-something divorcee. She and her family have psychic abilities, but Riley kind of ignores all of it. She just pushes it down. She does not want to be psychic. She wants to be as normal as everybody else, and she can't stand it that she is not normal. Being a divorcee and down on her luck, she lives in this weird mansion with a bunch of geriatric neighbors who are a very odd but entertaining group. And so the guy that she lives across the hall from is a crotchety old man who, you know, barely wears clothes, and when he does, it's a robe that he always forgets to tie, and, you know, things are exposed, and he doesn't care. Nobody in the mansion really likes him very much. So as I said, Riley suppresses all her psychic things that happen, except sometimes dead people talk to her. And then sometimes she gets visions that she can't ignore, and she gets a vision of her across the hall neighbor getting murdered. And she doesn't know whether she's like imagining this or whether this is a real vision. She's had them in the past, but she's never verified whether any of them have come true. She tries really hard to report in advance the possible murder of her neighbor without seeming too crazy, except the cops definitely think she's crazy. And she kind of runs out of the police station like, nope, I'm not crazy, I'm sorry, you can ignore everything I said. And then her neighbor ends up dead. Her vision comes true. This super hot private investigator comes knocking on her door, and at first he's there before the neighbor gets killed. He's trying to serve the guy with some lawsuit papers. He never gets a chance to do that because the guy gets murdered first. But him and Riley kind of have an unlikely partnership. And so they very quickly get themselves into a situation where he is her fake fiance. And a lot of hilarity ensues in trying to figure out this guy's murder. So at the same time, we've got a murder mystery going on, and we've got some supernatural things going on with the psychic abilities. We've also got a romance going on, and it's a slow burn romance in some ways, but in others, like it's not. It's kind of hard to describe, but it's in like a good way. The novel was fantastic. I really enjoyed it. It is a really good mix of comedy, romance, supernatural, crime thriller. It's all of those things wrapped up in this nice little bow. The author does a fantastic job. I love her humor. It's just enough, you know, it's like a little bit dark, but not too dark. There's romance sprinkled out, but it's not like crazy romance heavy. I would say this is like a mild spice. There's like one scene that's moderate, maybe. But overall, for a romance book, there's actually not that much like overt spice happening. There's a lot of things happening in people's heads, not a whole lot, not like a ton happening in the actual physical world until towards the end. But I think it's really good. It's very entertaining. This is my first time reading Lucy Score, and I really, really enjoyed it. So I can't wait to pick up more of her novels. I think she is going to be a new favorite here very shortly. And so I highly recommend, if you're looking for a weird combination of those different genres, The Dead Guy Next Door might be the perfect pick for you. And we have made it to the last book that I'm going to talk about today. It is a book that I have been reading for the last 2 or 3 months. It's been a long haul with this one, but not because of the book. And that is To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee. I have read this book once before. I read this in high school, and I loved it in high school, and I loved it this time around just as much. I probably honestly picked up more from the second reading than I did as a teenager, you know, because I have adult eyes now. But this is definitely was and probably always will be a 5-paw read for me. The reason it took me so long to read this book is because I read it along with my daughter, who is reading this for her high school English class right now, and they literally took like 3 months to read this book. They actually aren't done with it yet. They have one more chapter to read, but I decided that the last chapter is only like 4 pages, and I was not gonna let it sit for another week when I only have 4 pages of it left to read. So I just finished it. But if you're not familiar with To Kill a Mockingbird, it is a great American classic novel. It is about, racism and injustice in the South during the Great Depression. We follow a scout, our narrator, who is a young girl in the South who has an older brother named Jem, and their dad, Atticus, is a lawyer in a small town in the South. And he is tasked with representing a black man who was wrongly accused of a very terrible crime. And so we've got these ragtag kids, we've got Scout, we've got Jem, and then another little boy who comes along and is like their summertime friend, Dill. And so we go through a lot of seasons in this book, and the kids grow a little bit every few chapters. But eventually we get to the point where their dad has to defend this man. And, he's a brilliant lawyer, and we get this whole big scene in the courtroom where he gets to display his brilliance. And the children are really just trying to find their place in the world. They are trying to understand why things are the way that they are, because for children who are growing up in the South at that time, they're actually quite progressive in their thinking, in how they approach their thinking behind, segregation, and they don't understand why any of this exists at all. This novel is as eye-opening as it ever was. I am planning on doing a deeper dive into it with my daughter sometime soon as she finishes the book. And we'll have a little discussion. I think it would be really fun. If you would like to see a deeper dive into this book where my daughter and I kind of do a discussion, almost like a book club type thing, if you will, where we talk about the book in depth and what our thoughts are and stuff, let me know in the comments below. I'm thinking of doing that video, but I kind of want to see what everybody's interest level is in that type of video. But like I said, this book is like a masterpiece. It is a beautifully written book. It is not really slow in any part, and it's so complex and rich in the characters that it brings in and the way that the author chooses to portray the injustice that is happening. It's very much a show, not a tell. And the author is very good at making her point without having to make her point in plain words. The latter half of the book is very, very, very good. This book isn't really a happy book by any means. There is a little bit of humor, but it deals with a lot of really heavy topics, but in a really palatable and understandable way. And so I've talked about this book in a few other videos. I mentioned it in my 25 classics you should read this year video. And I'm still on board with that. I think that if you've never read To Kill a Mockingbird, you have to pick this book up. It is that good and that meaningful. Even in this day and age, arguably, especially in this day and age, it is still a very, very important book. I also mentioned it in my top banned books of the last few decades book. It was actually number 5 on the list. This book is banned in a lot of schools and libraries in the United States. And if you read it, you'll see why. It's an important book, but at the same time, it can be a scary book for people who don't want things to change. And so that's it. That is my reading wrap up for the last few months. Thank you so much for hanging in there with me. I know this was a long one. I tried not to spend too much time on each of these books, but I tend to have a lot of things to say about books, and it really seems impossible for me to really distill things into 30 or 60-second chunks. I'm working on it, guys. I'm sorry. But I am really looking forward to my next crop of books that I'm going to be reading for the next month. I will have a video out for that really soon. I'm thinking of having a theme for my reading in May. I thought that would be really fun to do, and so all of the books that I've chosen to read next month fall into this particular theme. I wonder if you can guess what it is. I'll give you a hint. It is something that is an alliteration with May. So the theme all starts with the words M. So if you have a guess, leave me a comment down below. I would be very interested to know what you guys come up with. So thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, feel free to like and subscribe. I always appreciate the support, and I hope you have a great day, and I will see you next time. Bye.